In centuries past, art and science weren't divided disciplines. They were intertwined in education, discovery, and culture, from Renaissance polymaths to early museum collections. But somewhere along the way, those fields were split apart and the boundaries between them hardened. To explore what happens when those worlds meet and why it matters, today we're joined by Courtney Johnston, the Chief Executive of Te Papa, New Zealand's National Museum. We'll talk about where those disciplines intersect and what a reintegration of science and the arts could look like in the decades ahead. I'm André and this is Articulate. Welcome in today, Courtney, to our studio. Thank you so much for coming in and making the time, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Our core question today, Courtney, is why do we so often see art and science as separate when they might just be two languages telling the same story? What's your response to that?
So many different responses. And one of the things that's had me reflecting on is how much of that thinking started for us at school, or even at quite a young age, and what you're good at. And if you're a kid who appears to be creative and expressive, were you channeled towards the arts? Whereas if you're a kid who was analytical, were you channeled towards sciences and maths? Because I think if you look at it on another level as well, one of the ways within Western culture that arts and sciences get split is definitely in a higher education system, in funding systems, and then in, I guess, the presentation to the public as well, and how things are talked about. People often talk about, if you go back centuries, there was less of a division between what we would call art and science, or perhaps an individual might make art and do science as part of one practice or just one curiosity about the world, perhaps, and I think particularly in an area that I get to work with at Te Papa with natural history, because natural history has always included being out in the environment, looking for things and finding things, bringing them home and caring for them, often documenting them, often with beautiful drawings, and then communicating and sharing them, arranging them, analysing them. So it's that full spectrum. There's one school of thought that says as knowledge within the Western world got bigger and bigger, more and more documented, knowledge built up on top of itself, it became impossible for any single human to hold all of knowledge inside their own head, and so we specialised more and more. And then I think there was a particular kind of like famous symbolic moment in the late 1950s with the British science advisor and novelist C.P. Snow, who published a lecture about the two cultures, art and science, and how they are distant from each other. And the people who live in those two worlds don't, his observation was, don't interact enough and therefore are missing out. The empathy and the imagination of the novelist, perhaps, the objectivity and outputs focus of the scientist. Probably a bit reductive, like a lot of these things are. And also, I think for certainly as long as I've been around, and I'm in my mid-40s, the cross-pollination has always been really important. And again, coming from the visual arts world like I do, the pairing of artists and scientists to explore ideas together in order to share them with the public has certainly been happening for as long as I've been, a grown up out in the field. So my answer is probably a yes and. Yes, there are different ways of practicing the investigation of the world and sharing it with people. Are they as binary or distant as they sometimes get portrayed as? Probably not.
I wanted to dig a bit deeper into this idea of separation as well when arts and science were split into different disciplines, and not only what you think we might have lost in that division, but also who benefits?
Mm. Gosh, that's an interesting question. The division of anything is powerful in that way because it allows the kind of utmost investigation of the potential, whether it's you as a person, a subject, or an area of the world, or both. So I think in that sense, everyone benefits from that division. I think when we lose out is when we pit things against each other like there are limits. When the arts, for example, bemoan the amount of coverage that sports get in the media, or when practitioners are pitched against each other for limited funding pools, or even, public recognition, perhaps. Competition always creates winners and losers in that sense, and not just in the sense of who comes first, but how do we value things. I would say one of my observations about Indigenous knowledge systems is that they are more comfortable in holding all these kind of forms in one way. So the deep observation of the world, and the analysis of that observation, which we would term science, which might be communicated to people in the form of a karakia or a waiata, which we might call spirituality or art, but without needing to see those as separated. Or one way that a person discussed it with me was the idea of Western science is like looking down through a microscope and trying to make things smaller and smaller and smaller and more discrete and less connected. Whereas a Mātauranga Māori view of things is more like a telescope of trying to see bigger and bigger and bigger and see all the relationships between things and how they influence each other. And then you immediately go, wow, the best of both worlds is to be able to travel between those two viewpoints.
Totally, yeah. There's such power in the zooming out as well. I feel like that's a mantra I try to live by, is like take a step back. People always say this, take a step back, look at the bigger picture, and there's a value in that, a deep value in that.
And I think if I was going to think about what unites the two, I think it's imagination, which is a particularly human quality, right? But to pursue the creation of anything new, whether it's a new scientific breakthrough or a new artwork, is to apply your imagination to what already exists and to speculate about what might be out there or what might be possible. And to form any kind of inquiry. So whether, I assume it's about like material sciences, what could this material do? Or here's AI, what is its artistic potential? Or here is a topic that I care deeply about and I want to connect the public to it through dance. All of that is achieved through imagination. And if I go back to that kind of my earlier observation about school, maybe if I could pick something that I'd love to instill in kids is that, to let kids be good at imagination before they worry about kind of like what am I good at in a applied subject method way. And one of the things I love about Te Papa and many of New Zealand's galleries and museums, and also I think increasingly around the world, museums and galleries where Indigenous ways of working and thinking are allowed and enabled to flourish, is that our curators and our kaimahi who work with the collections can flow across them. Because if you think about it, a painting and a fish both come from a place, a point in time, and from some form of human intervention. So they're the same in that way. how we use them is quite different. So if we think about maybe, if we broadly generalize that perhaps an artistic way of looking at the world, which is maybe more symbolic and informed perhaps by history, can be enriched by and enrich a more, I don't like the word objective that much, because I think we've all been trained up to have a bit of a problem with the idea of being objective, right? We're all positioned in a particular place. But that's where I think the two can play together productively. And I think there is an interesting meeting point in between the two, which is around making, because any form of making something is it's both a creative and a technological process. Artists need to have a huge mastery of tools and scientific understanding in order to make their ideas into objects or experiences in the world. In just the same way that scientists who wish to engage people with their work and their ideas need to be storytellers. And I think that's where we as audiences delight, in it. And we kind of, I think, maybe don't mind if we're listening to a novelist or an astronomer, because we are captivated by the power of their storytelling first and foremost. That's what lights up our curiosity and our imagination, and we're willing to go a long way with them into previously maybe uncharted territory for ourselves.
I wanted to take you, Courtney, back to something you said at the beginning about the classroom and education and STEM in particular. And I wanted to ask, in a world where there's so much focus on STEM, do you think the arts can actually help us ask better scientific questions, not just interpret the answers?
What I think one of the gifts of an arts education is the critical looking and the critical thinking that it teaches you. And it teaches you that all artworks or all pieces of human creativity, again, come from a person who has a point of view and who is trying to share that with you or influence you in a particular kind of way. I was listening to a podcast recently, an episode of the Deep Sea podcast that is co-run by one of our fish curators, Tom Linley, and he was talking to, I think I've got this right, a cryptozoologist.
Okay. What is that?
As far as I can make it out. Actually, I'm not entirely sure,
Okay.
so I'm not going to get that wrong. But one of the things that they were talking about was hoaxes, because there's been a lot of hoaxes in science, and where science falls over into the popular imagination. You think about mermaids that used to be part of those kind of curiosity shows where maybe a monkey skeleton and a fish skeleton would be joined together and then you'd pay 2 cents to view it. So hoaxes have been around for a long time in science, and people love a good story about, like brand new 4-meter long starfish found. This cryptozoologist was talking about how, of course, AI is making it much easier to generate this imagery, and as kind of slop news sites create and circulate this, the literacy, which is both a visual literacy and a critical literacy and a scientific literacy, to evaluate, is that real or is that not? Whether it's a piece of political news or a piece of social news or a piece of scientific news, is so vital, to our individual well-being and our social well-being, I think. An education that is rich in understanding that what you see comes from somewhere and someone with a point of view, and how to spot when you are being maybe manipulated or misled, or to how to ask questions so that you can get back to a source, which is a historical way of thinking, which is not that far away from an artistic way of thinking. I think alongside fostering curiosity, fostering that kind of curiosity that is a protective receptive, almost a happy, a not negative skepticism is almost going to be a survival tactic in the coming years. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, Courtney, what, if you can imagine, speaking to imagination, what a reintegration of science and the arts might look like in the West? What comes to your mind when you think of that?
If I think about what we do at Te Papa, I guess we try to bring the best of all these ways of understanding the world and their expertise. Like in the background of the museum, our curators, whether, it's a botanist or an art curator, they are writing research articles, they're publishing in journals, they're giving talks, they're providing media commentary, they're doing all of those things. On the floor of the museum for a visitor, what we're trying to do is create an experience that does elicit that kind of curiosity, a sense of awe, a sense of connection and belonging. So it's one interpretation of how that research and that understanding that's gone into building a collection and understanding it. But there are so many different channels that these are all being distributed out through. So in terms of Te Papa and art and science, I think what you will see us continuing to do is respecting the strength that those forms, terrible word, but forms of practice, that expertise and that kind of excellence that I talked about. You want an art curator to be able to speak deeply with an artist and bring the best forth from that artist for that own artist's way of working and what they're doing, but also to help connect that with the public. And likewise, that's what we want our scientists doing with the collections and the work that they're doing. So it's that continuity of care which evolves with every generation because ideas shift and priorities shift and urgency moves. But that continuity of care is quite a remarkable thing in society, and that you want to be that point of dependability in people's lives, but also in generations' lives, because that's where trust comes from.
I think just lastly, Courtney, you've brought an object in from your creative life to share with us today. Do you want to tell us what it is and why it matters to you, why you brought it in today?
Absolutely.
And show us what it is.
Yeah, I am going to bend down elegantly.
Please.
And I actually brought something
for
each of us.
For me as well?
For you
oh my
as
goodness.
well.
What are these? Are necklaces?
They are necklaces. I am not a maker. Myself, my third form art teacher told me that I was not good at art and I would be better off spending my time somewhere else. But let's both get these necklaces out.
Who are these by the way?
So these are by Alan Preston. Alan Preston
Oh my goodness.
One of the grandfathers of New Zealand contemporary jewellery. He's one of the founders of Fingers, which is the amazing contemporary jewellery store and cooperative in Auckland, opposite the Auckland Art Gallery. I'm wearing a necklace, I want to say banana seeds.
Banana seeds?
Like
those are big.
They're big. They're like...
Bananas have that big of a seed? Are they real banana seeds?
So, all right.
Or they're called this?
Huge failing on my part.
What?
I do less rampantly than I used to. I do collect art and jewellery and a little bit of ceramics, but I do not keep good records.
Oh, that's okay.
And
does anyone really keep good records?
Curators keep very good records. Yeah. Collection managers, and I am not one. So,
this is why you're the chief executive.
I know, but Alan for his whole career has taken materials from the natural world and crafted them, and I use that in the sense of using his hands to make them into something else, into wearable experiences like this. You're wearing...
What am I wearing here?
A
beautiful
necklace adorned...
heavy seashells.
Snail shells.
Snails?
I believe so. From somewhere, I believe, in the Pacific, quite common. I don't believe they're native to New Zealand.
Beautiful though.
But it actually looks really great on you, André.
I can't stop looking at your one either.
But I bought that one because it is quite outrageous, and I've never had the confidence to actually wear it in real
Really?
life. So it's an absolute delight to me to see someone else wearing
This
it.
is an honor that if you have
You
not
go,
worn this
you're-
out in
you're-
public,
you're
I'm the first
debuting
person
it.
and on camera as well, which seems
But I
crazy.
guess, the other thing, and I was talking to Justine Olsen, who's our curator of decorative arts, about this morning. She's recently been down to see an exhibition of Kobe Bossard's jewellery in Gore at the Eastern Southland Art Gallery, and Kobe is another one of our very, very senior jewellers. And Kobe's always had this position about jewellery that it belongs on the body. It does its work when it's on the body, and so to put it into little boxes and then put it into a museum collection is quite
A weird
a
thought.
weird thought, and it somewhat divorces the object from its purpose in the world.
It's not activated almost behind a screen.
And
or...
you could say the same thing, like whether those snail shells are attached to a necklace made by Ellen Preston or sitting in our natural history collection. It is this funny human peculiarity where we love to bring things together in order to understand them better and understand ourselves better. But I thought particularly with that necklace, it's an artwork made up of things that could belong in our natural history collection, and Ellen would, I think, be equally entranced no matter which side of the fence you were looking at it from.
Thank you so much for coming in today, Courtney.
been a
Such an
delight.
honour as always. At Te Papa, Courtney Johnston reminds us that art and science aren't rivals, they're partners in telling the story of our world. I'm André Chomko, and this was Articulate. Next time, we'll ask another big question about the role of art in our lives and talk to someone shaping its future. Find our episode archive on YouTube at thepost-nz or at thepost.co.nz/articulate. I'll see you next time.